Hello and welcome. Today we have a special treat. We are going to use our famous Rally Englanti and read some research papers and work on our very racist attitudes, or how do you say it?
Yes, we need to acknowledge our white privilege.
There is some kind of echo. I can hear my... Yeah, there was quite a high echo, maybe from your side. I can hear my own voice again with a lot of delay.
Well, that's strange because I use my earphones, so that there shouldn't actually be an echo from my side.
Okay, I know where's the problem. I have this. I'm a stupid idiot and I have this open in another window. But here we go. So now it's fixed. And let's just jump right into it. The links to this academic paper will be in the description and comments section. And this is the Racism Rootkit. Racism Rootkit, Understanding the Insidiousness of White Privilege. And to give a little bit of a background is that in Evergreen College, there was, it became a little bit, at least on the alternative news sites, a news that there was kind of an uprising. You could even say that the students held the principal as a hostage, and there was kind of this very odd thing. It all started when one of the teachers, Brett Weinstein, didn't like the idea that white people were not allowed to come to the college campus on some special day because there was some happenings there, and he kind of objected to that, understandingly, because he is Jew and he didn't quite like that racial segregation thing. But then like very crazy things happened there, and I suggest you read into it. But what I've heard is that this paper, which is written by a lot of PhDs, is circulating there and kind of being the proof that white people are the devil or whatever. So let's just jump into it. Despite efforts to increase this abstract racial awareness, whites continue to display limitation in their ability to acknowledge their racist transgressions when confronted. So yeah, very, very odd that if you go and blame someone for being racist for whatever reasons, and we'll go into the reasons in this paper, they say that they are not and kind of feel offended that you play the racist card. I don't know how can this be possible, but it seems to be. Seemingly open-minded whites continue to display what many authors have defined as racial microaggressions, yet display an unwillingness to explore the antecedents to their behavior once challenged. What are the mechanisms that whites utilize that prevent them from being open to considering underlying motivations of their behaviors? Failure to acknowledge the invisible whiteness of being the myth of mediocrity and the associated privileges that come from white superiority play a significant role in preventing the establishment of empathic connections with people of color. Using the metaphor of a computer root program, which remains hidden from the operating system designed to conceal itself from the overall operating system, a set of racist behaviors representing racist rootkit are highlighted that can serve as an explanation for the difficulties whites have when confronted with their behavior. And just before I give the mic to Elias, I want to say that I find this really interesting, this myth of meritocracy as I know that this paper will be arguing for the separate but equal treatment for people. So that is very funny. Go on.
Oh, yes. Well, I will have to give points to the author for using this analogy of a computer, because the rootkit is a certain kind of virus in a computer. So it goes to the root of the computer below the operating system, to the root system, or the basic input-output system of the computer, and so it's invisible. And this is something that they are trying to talk about here, that whites have this racist rootkit. They have this thing in their head that they don't even understand their own racism, and somehow it needs to be made visible to them. And so I will give him points for using that. As a computer scientist, I like this analogy, even though it's not quite perfect in every way in this article. With that being said, okay, yeah, I also wonder why would white people or other people in general get offended when somebody says to them that they are being racists and they themselves don't understand it. This seeming open-mindedness of white people, and then they talk about racial microaggressions. Well, they apparently refuse to explore why they might be accused of being a racist because of these microaggressions. Well, microaggressions have this reputation that they might be not really scientific, that they like the patriarchy, for instance, or the Jewish world conspiracy. There are people who claim that these things exist, but you can't really see them anywhere. So it's really a moot point if they really exist or not, because this starts sounding very similar to some other theories, like just as I said, the patriarchy theory, this invisible male force that keeps all women down, or the Jewish world conspiracy, which supposedly advantages the Jews or whatever have you, the Illuminati. This racial microaggression theory might seem something like that. At least to me it might seem. So I will need to have some more evidence of racial microaggressions, but perhaps this study will give some examples and some evidence later on. We will see. What else? Okay, this explores only white racism and white microaggressions. I am curious to find if this author or these authors are also going to talk about other kinds of microaggressions and racism. When are they going to address yellow privilege, for instance? Because isn't it the fact that Asians all over the world have the best scores in university tests? They have a very high earnings, very high salaries per capita, per person in every country they go. So yellow privilege would certainly be something worth exploring, don't you think?
Yes, well, yes, as it goes, well, that might be, but that goes into a little bit of race realism there, that races have some differences in IQs or whatever, so we don't want to touch that too much unless we really have to, because we don't want to red pill too many people. But so let's continue. Now it starts. The racism rootkit, understanding the insidiousness of white privilege. There has been numerous attempts to explain why US society resists change despite the acknowledgement that significant racial disparities continue to exist in the United States. A current concept to address more contemporary interpersonal bias among whites, aversive racism, Davidio, Goetner, Kawagami and Hodgson 2002, Gardner and Davidio 2005, highlights one type of racist behavior among whites, actions of well-meaning whites who nevertheless maintain a significant racial bias. While identifying a very subtle form of contemporary racism, few authors have specifically addressed the reasons underlying the perceived resistance among white peoples who directly confronted with their own racist attitudes. What contributes to the resistance appears to be related to a lack of understanding about the tension that exists between the American doctrine of equality and fairness juxtaposed with the daily and systematic prejudice and discrimination that continues in society. Gardner and Davidio, 2005. The following paper represents an explanation of the psychological and intellectual processes that prevent full awareness of this inherent tension among white Americans. Outward perceived beliefs about equality and their internal unspoken racist beliefs, using the analogy of a computer rootkit program, we identify a set of tools automatically employed by white people when confronted by their racism that maintains white supremacist beliefs that work to hinder further dialogue and closeness with racial and ethnic minorities. Much of the thinking has been influenced by the concept of aversive racism, a term first used by Gowell 1970s to illustrate a range of racist beliefs from traditional bigotry to a much more subtle belief system among white people. As we have expanded our understanding of what constitutes racist behaviors, new terms have evolved, such as modern racism, symbolic racism, and aversive racism. Su Cadilubo, Torino, Pucheri, Holder, Nadal, and Escalin, 2007. The common thread that runs through this lexicon speaks to the more disguised nature of racist behaviors and beliefs as opposed to a previously has been understood as an overt bigotry. While this new terminology has advanced our understanding of racism, we contend that a deep analysis is necessary to understand how seemingly well-intentioned white people continue to act, often unconsciously, in racist ways. For example, we wonder about the aversive racists who endorse fair and just treatment for all groups but unconsciously harbor feelings of uneasiness towards blacks and to try to avoid interracial interactions. Kotner and Ovidio, 2005, page 619. Can a deeper underlying premise operate to keep white people from feeling comfortable in a diverse setting and continue to display subtle and insidious negative feelings? If, as Hardy and Laszlofi, 1998, suggest, increasing one's racial sensitivity ultimately requires white people to examine how they live their lives on a daily basis, what are the variables that prevent full conscious awareness of how they operate in contemporary American society? All while asking, how do I manifest a pro-racist ideology? Hardy in Laszlofi, 1998, page 122. A significant advancement in this thinking occurs when the work of Sue et al. 2007 is delineating behaviors they call racial microaggressions. Racial microaggressions are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults to the target person or group, page 274. So what do you say?
Okay, so here we're not talking about this traditional racism, as they put it, about like if you are a KKK member, then you're obviously racist. But and if you say very overtly offensive slogans to racial minorities, then you're an obvious racist. But here they're talking about something more insidious and dangerous, it seems. Your everyday American is also a racist because even though he might believe in fairness and equality, the American doctrine of fairness and equality, they still somehow exhibit racist beliefs that they may not be aware of themselves. These microaggressions, and they identify these new terms that I have never heard of, like modern racism, symbolic racism, or aversive racism. I am really interested in hearing more about these terms because I haven't heard them before, and they don't seem very obvious what their intention is to me. What is symbolic racism, for instance? Do they write symbols on walls that are racists? Or modern racism, is that like you have this neo everything, neo-liberalism, neo whatever? Is this something similar, that modern racism is like even worse racism, or what do they mean by that? I'm really curious to find out more about.
I really am. I am really also curious, but I think symbolic racism might be that you drink milk.
Oh yes, that's a very racist behavior. Are there even people already like the media has been talking about certain people who drink milk and how they're being racist? I hear something like that already happening. So I guess drinking milk is a dangerous thing today in this complex modern world of ours. I don't drink milk myself, so I'm happy to say that at least in this way I am not a racist. Do you drink milk?
I do drink milk, but I also think drinking milk is dangerous because it gathers more mucus in your throat and such, and you should only drink milk when you are like a baby, and not adults. Not any mammal who is adult drinks milk, but I just like the taste.
I actually drink a lot of iced tea, which has a kind of darkish color. So does it make me an anti-racist? I wonder. What do you think?
Well, maybe. Who knows these days? But let's continue. These actions often occur outside an individual's conscious awareness, and when challenged can often be met with a response akin to, "That certainly was not what I meant by the comment." Su and his colleagues delineated 3 forms of microaggressions: microassault, microinsult, and microinvalidation. I bet none of these have anything to do with violence or anything like that. Microassaults are explicit racial slurs with the intention to hurt an intended victim through name calling. Microinsults are subtle communications that convey rudeness and attempt to demean one's racial identity. Finally, microinvalidations are comments that intend to exclude or nullify the feelings or experience of a person of color. I want to note here that how contradictory this already is, because before they talked about how microaggressions are microaggressions if they are meant or if they are even unconscious. But now these actually seem to insist on them being meant, like intention to hurt is there on the microassaults. If you microinsults are attempt to demean one's racial identity, so that also implies intent. And microinvalidations intend to exclude or nullify experience of person of color. None of these sound like something that you can just accidentally do, but this is the great irony of all this, that because this is of course so subjective. If I ask you that where are you from, you can interpret that as a micro assault because I might be thinking that you are not from here, around here. So like whatever can be whatever. So it doesn't actually mean anything if you have here all these intentions, intent in these explanations, but then again, you can just reinterpret it and say that, yes, you have this intention that only I see because I have very fragile self-esteem and I want to play the victim card here. But you didn't mean that in that way you actually would have some kind of very good contextual point for making the question, for example. The authors attribute the particularly insidious nature of microaggressions to the fact that the racist reality of the experience is often invisible to both perpetrator and recipient. Su et al. 2007, page 275. The perpetrator often is able to explain away the act with a plausible and non-biased explanation, and the recipient may have the feeling that something is not right, but due to the subtle and indirect nature of the microaggressions, not be able to prove it. In fact, many people of color may find it easier to handle overt and obvious racist acts rather than microaggressions, which can be vague and disguised. Herbert, 2007, page 5. Thus, the psychological reverberations of these actions impact both white perpetrator and the minority recipient. What can be learned from this important development in the study of cultural racism? First, the impact of microaggressions falls primarily on people of color who are burdened with having to continually decide whether or not to intervene and educate white people about racial sensitivity. Second, racial awareness, a necessary component of cultural sensitivity, becomes challenged when white people are confronted about the intention behind their behavior, comment, etc. The various defensive responses of white people to the moment of truth encourages the authors to examine more closely the mechanisms that may prevent a white person from acknowledging impact of microaggressions.
Yes, just like you said earlier, at the beginning of the article, they talk about microaggressions, that they identify the problem here being this seemingly well-intentioned American person who believes in meritocracy and democracy and fairness, but then somehow they have this racist rootkit operating in their head that they aren't even aware of. So everything that they do is unintentional. Now they say that it's actually intentional, this micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations, these different types of verbal karate, so to say, they seem very intentional in this characterization that they use. Like you said, that if you ask where are you from, if you have a different skin color, where are you from? This is a micro insult, I guess. So is it intentional or is it not intentional? And then towards the end of what you just read, this, when white people are confronted with their moment of truth, then suddenly they seemingly don't understand what's going on, and they need to be helped to acknowledge and understand the impact of their microaggression. So I'm not sure if this author himself is really, or themselves are really in the clear. Are they talking about intentional stuff or unintentional stuff? What I do agree with them is that it's certainly easier to say that it's racism if somebody calls you some obviously offensive word, but it's less easy to accuse someone if they ask you where are you from, because in my opinion it's very believable and likely that this person didn't mean it in a racist way. I mean, I would actually assume that it's the norm that people don't assume it. People don't mean it in a negative way. They mean it in a way that they're interested in the other person, and then that's why they ask, instead of trying to demean the other person. You get the picture here that it's a micro insult. It's a way to demean another person, to convey rudeness and demean one's racial identity. I mean, if somebody asks me where am I from because of my accent, for instance, which isn't American or British English accent, then in most cases, unless they specifically say that, pose the question in a rude manner, then I would assume that they're actually meaning it in a positive way, that they are interested in me. But here you have a distinctly negative connotation to this thing, that it's always racism, it's always demeaning and rude to ask such questions, and it's a display of racism. That's what I think about this.
Yes, and I would like to add that I do think that there is inherent in people this a tendency to somewhat dislike the other or something like that. So that our minds are in a way that we make kind of generalizations, and we can't take everyone as an individual. And then whatever happens in life, it's kind of a role. You might end up thinking that some group of people are lazy and some group of people are smart, like Asians or whatever, or something like this. And this is an inherent ability in all of us. And it is actually, if you want to be able to exist in this world, it's impossible to turn off, because it's just something you need for your everyday life. But that being said, I think that the thing, because there's is it unconscious, is it intentional, the point there might be that it's really insidious, to borrow the word, that if it's unconscious, if you can't do anything about, then this paper and any work on it then is totally like meaningless. You can't do anything about it. But if it's intentional, then it's more of a bad thing, and there is this evil intention behind it. So when you kind of flip-flop between them, you get to make the thing actually bigger and more valid than it might actually is, because then you can interpret those unconscious things as intended things, and vice versa, in a way that you can always kind of gaslight the victim that no, you said racist thing, and that's my feeling, and whatever you say, you are just trying to rationalize it or whatever. It's still a racist thing, and I can be the final arbiter of truth about this. But let's continue.
I'd like to say to that other thing that yes, it can be a micro, or it can be an attempt to demean someone, to ask where they are from. I mean, I could imagine sometimes a question like that being actually used in a way that doesn't sound obviously demeaning, but then in the end has a negative impact on that person. So there is that, but you can almost always pretty much understand it from the context, how it is meant. If a person is continuously doing snide remarks about you, remarks that make you look bad, then you can pretty much assume that they are doing it intentionally to demean you. And if they are continuously being polite to you, then this one thing probably is also rather a sign of politeness than rudeness. So saying that if you ask where do you come from, that this is automatically a good thing or a bad thing, that's a mistake. You need to understand the context.
Yes, that is true. And let's continue. So it is our belief that the difficulty many white people have when confronted with the impact of their racist behavior centers around the unconsciously held cultural values of white privilege and ultimately white supremacy. a term that is often associated with such terms as the Ku Klux Klan and skinheads. White supremacy is much more inconspicuous and serves to hide racism, allowing white people to oppress and harm persons of color while maintaining their individual and collective advantage and innocence. Sue 2006, page 15, emphasis added. This privilege, quite hidden from conscious awareness, is an essential element of the white people's conditioning as they grow up in contemporary American society. In short, whites in the United States cannot help but be indoctrinated into the privilege of whiteness, the myth of mediocrity, Sue et al. 2007, and ultimately supremacy. This has been written about by McIntosh 1988, who described white privilege as an invisible knapsack of unearned benefits that have been granted to all white people based on their looks alone. What prevents white Americans from openly acknowledging the receipt of the unearned benefits of being white is that they have been taught the principles of democracy, which emphasizes the right of all people to be treated equally, and most consciously believe they live according to these principles of equality. They have been unwilling to explore the fact that they have unconsciously engaged in a serious form of denial about the more dubious and subtle forms of experiences that contradict these democratic ideals: denial of privilege, denial of supremacy, denial of unearned nature of this benefit, and most importantly, the denial of the necessity to examine supremacy. Sue has described this unwillingness of white Americans to explore their unconscious biases, racial prejudices, and racial oppression as a conspiracy of silence that maintains the essential benefits bestowed on someone by virtue of being white. Sue 2006, page 22. He maintains that only by making whiteness visible will Americans be able to unpack the conscious association of whiteness with the normality and superiority of a closer actualizing a society's legitimate equality. A significant step in making whiteness visible to well-meaning white people who nonetheless harbor long-standing fears and biases, act these biases out unconsciously and or consciously, and display various types of microaggressions, is finding a way to make such invisible knowledge visible. This is where we began to ask questions. What are the mechanisms that prevent white people from remaining open when confronted or invited to examine their racist behavior? How does white superiority function to confuse white people and keep them unaware of the impact of their behavior when dealing with people of color? To what degree does white superiority keep white people from being in relationship with people of color? How can white people learn how to remain in relationship with people of color even as they engage in their own fearless search to make their invisible racist belief system visible? This fearless search requires white people to hold themselves accountable for their participation in a pro-racist ideology. It involves taking a critical look at the white people have been socialized to believe is normal, and more importantly, identifying set of behaviors that exist solely to prevent the conscious awareness of microaggressions in order to heal and establish real sustained relationships with people of color. White people need to be willing to find a way to make visible, to make abnormal and ugly the normal. Watson Jones 2004, page 507. So tell me about your racist ideology.
My racist ideology? Well, Okay, they talk about Ku Klux Klan and the skinheads, and this is white supremacy, but it is much more than that. So they say that there is this thing called white supremacy, but don't they need to prove it first before they say that there is such a thing? So how can they prove that there is white supremacy? Shouldn't there actually be a yellow supremacy if you think about it? If people of Asian or East Asian origin, they are mostly on top of things when it comes to university admissions, to high wages. It's so are we actually living in a yellow supremacy rather than a white supremacy? I'm really confused here. I I don't know. Perhaps I'm just justifying my own racism and white privilege here, but I just have a hard time understanding why would there be a white supremacy? Shouldn't that be somehow manifested in giving different people different wages for the same job, or shouldn't white people be on top of every profession, every university admission, and so on and so forth? At least in white nations, if there is this thing called white supremacy and white privilege. I just am not quite convinced yet. This article needs to do a better job. It hasn't convinced me quite of my evilness and my white privilege and supremacist ideals until now. So I can't really tell you that much about my white supremacy and white racism. Also, another thing that comes up is that what keeps whites from having relationships with people of color? I mean, is there such a thing? Here in America, you have a big segregation between different racial groups: the whites, the blacks, and the Hispanics. They all rather like to associate with others of their own ethnicity rather than with other ethnicities, which then puts the question: are Hispanics also racists when they don't, or are blacks also racists when they don't want to engage with white people or Hispanics or blacks? This really bothers me. Why is it always white racism? Is it always the whites' fault when people are in their different groups and don't want to associate with each other? Or what do you think?
Well, I just like to ask you this question that from your birth to this day, haven't people been telling you all this time that the white man is keeping you down?
Me? No, I am the white man. So I guess they have been telling me that I am keeping others down.
Yeah, I think that might be the thing that people are telling them that.
So that's the reason why they assume that the white person is at fault, because they have been telling us this. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I do think that there's a lot of this idea that the white man keeps you down, which is, well, as we can see in this academic paper, at least in academic circles, but I think it even can start at the lower tier, like elementary school or whatever, and people just like they talk to each other about it, and teachers might talk about it and such. I think it's actually like a thing. Like if you just listen to Black Lives Matter protesters in interviews, or whoever who is like really active about this and sees this thing, you can from the between the lines read that they have been told a lot that white man keeps them down in certain situations.
Well, I do remember in school there was an assignment. We had to read a small text about how to combat racism. We should go to areas where you have minorities and live with them. And I personally wasn't that interested in the idea of choosing my living place solely based on skin color. I wasn't so interested in the idea. I wanted to rather choose my living location based on was objectively the best place to live for me, for according to what I need in a living living place. But then I guess there is this indoctrination that we need to avoid being racists. We need to go to we as white people need to go to places where lots of black people are and people of Middle Eastern origin live, that to avoid being racists. But I don't know, it just didn't. It just has never really appealed to me that I should prove that I'm not a racist by making such a big decision like where I live.
Well, I think I'm not sure if it's called actually like contact theory or something, but there is this I think scientific study or whatever that suggests that when you bring different kind of peoples together and they live together, then they develop less racist views or whatever. But I would actually argue that that seems to be exactly the opposite. I don't know what that tells us about the human nature, but like if you compare like Finland in the 60s and Finland today after all this immigrant crisis, etc. I know that there's a huge bias in internet because now we have more of a way to see other people's ideas and thoughts and exchange ideas a lot better. But even if you take that into account, I would think that actually it makes people more racist when they are forced to live together, when they, like you said before, naturally segregate to their own areas. And I find this really, really puzzling because what does it mean? And like, for example, what does it tell you about this European illusion that we are just all global citizens that for somehow just like to live there in their own segregated areas? And even this paper that is trying to kind of like fix these things is arguing basically that we are separate but equal, so that we should have the different water fountains, except that they would just like more water fountains for black people, of course.
Well, I wouldn't call it necessarily racism, what you say. That this theory that if you live together, then you learn to appreciate each other and all that. I don't believe that theory that much. I do believe that if you live with other people from other cultures and places, then you will understand them better than if you haven't ever lived with them. You will understand them and their culture much better, but that doesn't automatically mean that you will like them more. It might lead you to liking them less than before, because sometimes it might mean you like them more, and other times it might mean that you like them less if you live with them. But if you do end up liking them less because of practical reasons, like if they have very different living conditions and ways to live, and you really don't like that out of practical reasons, then I wouldn't call it racism. I would just call them that experience-based dislike.
Yeah, well, I think I agree with you. But here's the question then: that would it be fair to assume that you might like your own ways and own culture better than some other culture, and in that way prefer? Of course, you can see the problems in your own culture. You can see the problems in your own society, etc. And you can see that, okay, those guys have that thing better. But also, like, I would argue that West has the best culture in the world.
Well, that's racist. You can't say that. Oh my God. And I will have to acknowledge my own racism here also. I do think that Western culture should be the universal culture everywhere. That the Western culture is the best, or at least one of the best ones. I could imagine some East Asian culture also being quite good, but at least Western culture is one among the best cultures to live in. This is my belief. I might be just white-splaining here, or being a racist or a bigot, but that's how I believe. And yes, I do think that people generally do tend to like their own culture. Perhaps they are accustomed to their own culture because they have lived in their own culture for their first years, for the formative years, and then after that, it's also more difficult to get accustomed into another culture if you've already prepared for that first culture that you were born in. So there certainly are natural problems with different people from different cultures living together, even if they have the same skin color.
So I wanna just highlight one part of this paper I just read. So there's this white people need to be willing to find a way to make abnormal and ugly the normal. So this is like a really odd sentence, because are they saying that people of color are abnormal and ugly?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Let's read that sentence again. In order to heal and establish real sustainable relationships with people of color, white people need to be willing to find a way to make abnormal and ugly the normal. Yes, that's a very good question. Are they talking about minorities here? Are they abnormal and ugly? That's a very very strange way of putting it. Is this author of this paper actually unintentionally exposing his own racism here? That's what I take from this sentence.
Yeah, so yeah, it's very odd. Like, uh, what if the author like acknowledges that they are worse off in some ways, but then that they need some kind of a helping hand, so they need this gaslighting rootkit technique or whatever, because they can never compete, because they are in their own minds abnormal and ugly.
Yes, if these racist beliefs are the ugly and abnormal thing, that could also be an interpretation. But
That is true.
certainly, yeah, yeah, that's everything I have to say about it.
Yeah, so let's continue. In effect, the doorway into politically alive relationships with people of color involves a willingness to continually step on landmines, exploring and spotlighting racist behaviors or thoughts, all the while resisting the temptation to fall into a denial or becoming ignorant of such behaviors or thoughts. An unwillingness to do so prevents accountability and ultimately restricts the deepening of relationships between white people and people of color. We propose that white people possess a rootkit program that works to prevent the recognition of racist behaviors and thoughts using the analogy of computer programming. This rootkit program, which by design is hidden from sight, will be used to explain the mechanisms that prevent white people from recognizing and admitting their unconscious racist beliefs. So what do you think about this?
Well, okay, first of all, is this racist root program only something that white people possess? Because it really does sound like that from the way he is, or they're phrasing this thing, that even though they might in the future write the paper about yellow privilege or black privilege or whatever privilege, but it does here really seem like there's only only white people possess this racist rootkit programming in their head that they apparently cannot get rid of ever. So are they actually racist themselves when they say that white people like genetically, or is it culturally? Did they say in the beginning that this is something cultural? But that white people only have this thing. This really seems to sound quite racist to me. If they think that really whiteness is the thing here, that only white people have this racist rootkit program in their heads.
Exactly, that is very odd. Like you would get that idea that it's only white people's fault and not something universal. But let's continue. The rootkit program. Most computer operating systems within a computer can be accessed by what has been called a rootkit that operates in the root kernel of the operating system without the operating system being aware of its presence. Thus, it exerts a powerful source of control within the hardware structure. I have to point out here that I think they have here quite a good point. Like, I don't know, like I'm starting to, the more I read about human psyche and studies about human mind, I'm starting to think that Jung might have been right. Like that we are all the time dreaming, and just when we are awake, the input from our eyes and other senses is too much, and it kind of disrupts the dream so that we are not aware of it, but it's still running in the background. Because I've come to this conclusion with meditation and reading about being present, etc., that I often get this kind of narrator voice in my head that tells me that you are no good and you shouldn't even try that, and you made yourself a fool in that way, etc. And it can be if I'm stressed out, or maybe there's something like kind of a crisis in my life or whatever, it can be quite hard and very like distressing. But I can kind of think that, let's call it ego or whatever, but that it's not part of me. And that, for example, with meditation, I can get momentarily it silenced, and then if I can do that, I get so relaxed and good feeling that it's something that is always present in my mind. I'm not consciously aware of it all the time, or even most of the time, or whatever, but it's something that really doesn't help me.
So is this something that only you have, or only white people have, or do you think it's universally human?
Well, for example, Eckhart Tolle has written about it, many books. I think it's very in the center of Buddhist belief. What I've talked to people who have studied Buddhism, I think it's like a very well-known idea that because basically in the modern day we are so fixated always with, like, we are watching these signals like internet or reading papers or whatever, so we don't really stop and give ourselves time. We don't usually do anything like prayer or meditation, so people are very unaware of this thing. But if they just stop and listen to their own body, listen to themselves, it can be quite they can get quite aware that there is something like this. Maybe I explain it a little badly, but something like that there is a me inside of me kind of thing, and there's a lot of books about it.
So you're saying that also black people might have this thing?
No, yes, everyone has it. Everyone has it. It has nothing to do with race or sex or anything like that.
So it's an unracist rootkit, anti-racist rootkit then.
Yeah, I don't know what is that, but something like that. So does it and yeah, and I'm not anyway saying that it has anything to do with race. It's more of true that self-doubt and such. But anyways, thus it exerts a powerful source of control within the hardware structure. A rootkit is a set of software tools intended to conceal running processes, files, and system data from the overall operating system. concealment is essential with the goal to maintain command or control over a situation while being acknowledged. Famous incidents of computer virus attacks on various information technology systems occur as a result of secret instructions being installed into the root kernel and then released into the computer's operating system. At a simple level, instructions within the root program maintain a significant level of control over a computer's overall operating system. An essential component of root program is that it must remain hidden from easy detection. Just a metaphor of an underlying and concealed program that maintains control over a system became an obvious analogy to a rooted set of behaviors and thoughts that exist solely to prevent white people from conscious awareness when they are confronted with their pro-racist behavior. While an appropriate analog, the authors acknowledge it has its limitations when applied to the complexity of the human psyche. If we examine what happens when a white person launches a microaggression and is confronted by a person of color, frequently the white person will express disbelief, confusion, denial, or qualification. Rarely is the white person able to acknowledge the bias present in a microaggressive comment or behavior. A typical response might be, "Oh, now you know me, you know I'm no- oh, now you know me, you know I'm not a racist. Of course you know I didn't mean that." Whereas an idealistic response might be, "Oh, let me think. Yes, you are right. My comment was a knee-jerk response, and I can see how I was dismissive of you and made a racist comment." Unfortunately, the latter response is less common. Paradoxically, it is only through the complete and open acknowledgement of biased comments and behaviors that relationships between people and diverse backgrounds can be strengthened. This requires that white people be much more willing to consider the underlying mechanisms at play that prevent the full acknowledgement of their supremacy and ultimately their racism. Using the root program analogy, then could it be possible that this program operates unconsciously in white people and immediately activates when they are confronted about their racist behavior?
Oh my, oh my. So if a black person or an Asian person, for instance, asks me where am I from, because I don't sound Chinese if I speak Chinese, or I don't look Chinese, then is that person also displaying racist behavior? Is it the microaggression against me, or is it even the contrary of that? Is he microaggressing himself when he asks me such questions with the assumption that whiteness is so much better? That if a Chinese person, for instance, points out that I don't look typical Chinese, or I don't sound typical Chinese, that I look white, then is he actually praising me in a subtle way when he acknowledges my whiteness? Or how should I interpret that? Is there anything like that in Chinese people's brains? Are they possibly capable of racism? That's something I'm wondering here. And then this typical response, like if I ask someone, so where are you from? You don't sound or you don't look a certain way. Well, you know me. I'm not. You know, I'm not racist. Of course, I didn't mean that. So instead of that, if somebody accuses me of being a racist when I ask where are they from, the better response would be, "Oh, let me think. Yes, you're right. Asking you where you're from was a knee-jerk and racist response, and I can now see how dismissive I was of you. and I made a racist comment, I shouldn't ask where you are from, because obviously that's racism. It just sounds very artificial and very distant from the real world. Why would anybody want to do that if they weren't intentional? If their intention wasn't to demean the other person? It just sounds like this paper has nothing to do with reality. So at least until this point, this paper has not succeeded in convincing me of my racism and my rootkit program.
You are just a white devil. Remember that by this paper's logic, you are normal and the black person is ugly. But I want to just point out one thing here that I found very interesting is that so like I don't know, like
Vaino, your name doesn't sound American, and your accent doesn't sound American either. Where are you from?
I'm from Finland. You racist bastard.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, let me think. Yes, you are right. My comment was a knee-jerk response, and I can see how I was dismissive of you and made a racist comment. Now that's how I should have replied. I'm starting to learn this stuff.
Yeah, what I started to think is that this has to do with like the whole this kind of academic field. Like you can think about this, and you can think about some gender studies, etc. That I think that our Western culture is like very proud that we treat people equally, and we don't care about things like gender or sex or race. And they really found a way in this academic field to kind of really hit our Achilles knee, so to speak, because like the one thing is that like if they're saying that, who would say that I was dismissive of you and made a racist comment when racism in our society is such a huge big deal and means basically that you are an evil person. So like it's really odd. Like, could you say that yes, I was dismissive and I showed a sign of bigotry or something other than racism, because that's such a devil and that's such a bad thing. And I think that has to do with like they really found a way to really guilt us, very much guilt whites, very much guilt men in a way that we don't want to be seen as racist or sexist. That's the last thing a Westerner wants to do. What do you think about this?
Yes, I agree. I mean, in a culture that is racist and finds racism good, then why would the accusation of someone being a racist be such a serious one? Why would any white person who is being a racist feel the need to justify himself and saying that I'm not a racist, I didn't mean it that way? Why wouldn't he just say like a proper KKK member, yes, you're right, and that's how it should be. I did call you bad words, and that's what you are, and deal with it.
Yes, that is true. Well, the racism rootkit. We return once again to the question, what prevents white people from acknowledging their microaggressions? Our answer is that a rootkit or set of behaviors buried deep into the root program of the white person's psyche becomes activated to prevent the full awareness of racist thoughts and behaviors. They are specific behaviors whose primary purpose is to mask racist behaviors, beliefs, thoughts, etc. thereby preventing the individual from owning or acknowledging racist behavior. Based on the responses of white participants in a series of race awareness workshops and review of the literature, we have identified 13 tools in the Racism Rootkit that may be used by white people to prevent the conscious awareness of their racism. The tools can be put into two categories, offensive and defensive. One tool can be used either offensively or defensively. Each of these responses can emerge when the white person is challenged or invited to look how race might be a factor in a given social interaction. And now we have at page 10 this kind of listing that there is racism rootkit behaviors, denial, hurt feelings, reflection, narcolepsy, shame, I don't understand, masochism, apology, Fawkes, compassion, defense, white guilt, offensive, Bain game, offensive, attack, offensive, intellectualization, both. And I want to just say that before here that it says that the tools can be put into two categories, offensive or defensive. One tool can be used either offensively or defensively. Well, okay, it doesn't mean that one tool can be used both offensively or defensively, but that other one of those, so some of those tools are offensive, some of those tools are defensive, I would say, because they are here, they haven't named all of these, but like, for example, white guilt is offensive. There is no defensive white guilt here, and etc. But I love it that the narcolepsy is here. White people be so racist that they just tune out when a black person is speaking. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I also wonder, or are they saying that if you accuse a white person of being a racist, then they start doing drugs, and by that then they fall asleep? Or how is this supposed to work? I'm sure they will give a very reasonable explanation right after this list, so that we can understand why narcolepsy is actually among this list. I would personally characterize it as a medical condition rather than a racist behavior. But what do I know? I'm just a racist white man. Then other than that, okay, hurt feelings. They said that that's a defensive strategy. In my opinion, that's actually a very offensive strategy. If I play the victim and tell about my hurt feelings that you called me a racist, then that's actually a very offensive strategy. I'm blaming you now for blaming me. So that's actually, I totally disagree about how hurt feelings are used here. What else? Okay, there are lots of other things that I don't really understand here, like what does white guilt or pain game mean in this context, or masochism. But then there is a Fawkes apology or for compassion. Those things I can understand that they are a form of deflection. That you kind of display a mocking compassion, or make an apology, like, I'm sorry if you felt offended. That this is not a real apology. That this can be something a way to deflect criticism, not just in a racist context, but in any context, to be honest. But I'm sure we will be wiser when we read about these different strategies.
This is so stupid that I might be in denial, but I can't wrap my head around this sentence that one tool can be used either offensively or defensively. I do know that you might have in a scientific paper some kind of word limit that you need to have enough words, but is that the most redundant sentence ever when it doesn't make in any interpretation any sense. You could think about it that one tool can be used both defensively or offensively. Well, that doesn't seem to be true because, for example, white guilt is offensive, whereas hurt feelings is deflection. Okay, but like there's no defensive white guilt. But then you could think about it that, okay, they are either one or the other, that they can never be both. But then you have intellectualization that is both. So like, how do you interpret this sentence? One tool can be used either offensively or defensively, since no matter how you look at it, it's not true at all.
Yeah, it just seems like a false sentence, because what it should say is one tool can be used either offensively or defensively or in both ways.
Yeah, true. That would fix it.
Correct sentence. That would be a correct sentence, but this just doesn't seem to be true. But
actually, that would have also a problem that if the thing is really that some of these are defensive, some of these are offensive, and some of these are both, if you would change the sentence like you suggested, then you would think that all of them can be used in all of the three categories, I would think.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
But I guess you can understand that also.
Can you continue a little bit from here, because I really want to hear about this denial.
Okay, so this list of defensive rootkit behaviors and their description. So first we start with denial. This tool and response is the easiest to spot. When whites are confronted with statements, behaviors, or beliefs that are at their core racist, one of the first tools in the rootkit that becomes activated is denial. Responses such as, I have black friends, or I don't see color, are evidence of the denial tool. An inability to be open to the possibility that the experience of the other could be valid is a consistent element of white supremacy. Denial becomes the opposite of what Hardy and Laszlo describe when they speak about racial sensitivity, namely, using oneself to actively challenge attitudes, behaviors, and conditions that create or reinforce racial injustices. Activating the denial tool is also consistent with micro-assaults. The repudiation of the experience, micro-invalidation of the person of color, is a typical byproduct when white people do not acknowledge their racist behavior. Okay, then the next thing is hurt feelings. It's a form of deflection, it says here. Deflecting so that the focus is off the racist behavior is the second tool within the rootkit. This happens when a white person immediately responds to a confrontation about a microaggression by acting hurt. By expressing hurt feelings, white people assume that a deeper relationship exists that should excuse the comment or behavior, thus negating where the behavior stemmed from. It serves to place the white person at the center of the interaction, the place assigned as a result of white supremacy. This tool is particularly insidious because it places an emotional burden on the receiver of the racially based oppression or trauma. When a white person responds, I'm hurt that you think I could say or believe something like that, people of color experience it as both a micro-invalidation and a deflection. Another consequence of the deflection is that it moves the white person away from a moment of greater connection that might be possible if he or she had been willing to reflect on the comment within the context of the relationship. Okay, do we have anything to comment about denial or hurt feelings?
Well, I don't know. I think we talked about a little bit about that hurt feelings bit in a way that, yes, like it gives all the power to the accuser if you think like this. And about denial is that, what if you don't see color? Like, didn't Martin Luther King Jr. talk about that you shouldn't see color, that we should just see the individual and we should just treat others with respect. I think with the attitudes that nowadays people have, they would just go to Martin Luther King's job place and try to get him fired for being a pro-racist coon.
Oh my, I didn't even realize MLK was a racist. Well, thank you so much for informing me. But, okay, another thing that sticks to my mind is that responses such as, I have black friends, that this is denial. But didn't they previously say in this paper that it's somehow evil and bad if a white person doesn't have black friends or people of color as friends? This now they can't use that. Now they can't. Now somehow it's a bad thing if they say that they have such friends. I'm not sure if this is another inconsistency in this paper that I have found. Well, then,
No,
hurt feelings.
I have to comment that
okay.
You have to have those black friends, but you are never to mention about them.
I should. So they are basically my imaginary friends.
They can be real friends, but you are not to talk about your black friends or you're racist.
I see. So I should never mention my black friends. But then, isn't that also a form of racism? When I never mention my black friends, doesn't that mean that I'm ashamed of my black friends?
Well, if you only use your black friends as a get out of jail free card in these kind of situations when you are accused, it's a bit suspect.
Oh, I see. Yes. Thank you so much for exposing my racism. Well, apart from this, they talked about hurt feelings. That this is a deflection. If I'm hurt, you call me a racist. Well, isn't this whole paper basically a hurt feelings thing? That it's hurting my feelings when you say that when you ask where I'm coming from, why do I have a different accent or a different skin color? That don't I belong to this group? Isn't this just hurting my feelings so much? Isn't this whole paper just a giant hurt feelings deflection?
Isn't this the I have a black paper deflection?
Black paper?
Well, I assume that the authors are people of color.
I don't know. Let's see again. Can we perhaps assume anything about their names? They're Paul Pendler and Philip Beverly from Chicago State University. The latter is. I don't know. At least those aren't any exotic sounding names. So
yeah, true. We can't assume that, but I was just thinking that even if you think about it as a black paper, as this is kind of this pro-black and pro-people of color kind of anti-racist paper, then that we are deflecting our things when we've read this paper and we think this is just hurt feelings.
No, I didn't understand. Can you try to explain this?
Never mind, it was a bad joke. Continue on the narcolepsy. I really want to read about the luxury of falling asleep.
This should be good. Okay, narcolepsy, another tool of racism. A more sophisticated tool, narcolepsy, occurs when seemingly committed white people reach a threshold in their racial sensitivity and literally appear to go blank. This can occur from a white person's sheer exhaustion when trying to wrestle with his or her racism and its impact on their relationships. Recognizing the weight of oppression and the depth of racial trauma may also instigate the narcoleptic response. This tool can appear in racial workshops or any time when white people attempt to develop greater racial sensitivity. A white person's use of narcolepsy around racial awareness reflects privilege. However, as obviously people of color do not have the luxury of falling asleep. Oh, so if a white person is overwhelmed by all these accusations about his racism or for some other reason they have a narcoleptic episode, then that's a sign of racism also. Whereas black, how do black people not, or people of color, not have the luxury of falling asleep? Of course they can sleep.
I think if these people would run the world, then white people would not get the narcoleptic medicine.
Probably not. It would be labeled a racist medicine, at least if white people try to get it, so they then have to suffer from their narcolepsy. Well, okay, I guess I'll just go on then, or do you have anything else to say about narcolepsy?
Go on.
Okay, shame is the next tool. Displaying shame in response to a confrontation about racist behavior can look similar to hurt feelings. When this tool is active, the white person begins a debilitating shame spiral that prevents him or her from fully experiencing the potential truth of a racist statement, behavior, or belief. Once the white person descends into a shame spiral, the emotional attention is fixed on that person, placing witness and its wounds at the center rather than the underlying premise, i.e., supremacy or privilege, that created the statement or behavior. The deceptive element of the shame spiral is that it allows the person to place the responsibility of the state for the statement, behavior, or belief on something outside of him or herself. It elevates responsibility to the cultural level and absolves the transgressor without ever addressing the damage or the original interaction that was challenged. Okay, shame. So basically, if I feel bad and if I display my feeling of shame, I'm not even accusing anyone of anything like having hurt feelings, but I'm just feeling so much shame about for being shamed. But isn't that just a natural human reaction that people, if they are being attacked or shamed, that they display certain behaviors, like they might blush, or they might, I don't know, they might retreat or something like that? Isn't that just a natural human reaction? So, and involuntary at that. How can a person control something that is involuntary?
Yes, this is very odd. Like, I can't make heads or tails out of this thing. That I guess they needed more weapons, but I would say that I can't really grapple how this is anything really.
I see. So then the next tool in the toolbox of white supremacy is masochism. In order to satisfy some internal need for punishment of historical oppressions, some white people engage in masochistic behaviors. One example of this tool is not locking one's car doors while driving through neighborhoods with high crime rates and significant minority populations. This behavior is unconsciously masochistic. Most people of color who live in the same neighborhood would not dare engage in such irresponsible behavior. Another example of the masochism tool is when a white person allows black people to unload their anger for what whites have done to blacks in the historical past. In this instance, the white person becomes a receptacle for potential and actual abuse. This acceptance of punishment is a deflective mechanism that prevents a white person from examining his or her individual behavior. Okay, so if you leave your car's doors unlocked while driving through neighborhoods, and this is in some way you're trying to make reparations for historical oppression. This is just something I have never even thought about. How can somebody be so foolish if there is a real danger of people breaking in to a moving car? I mean, perhaps I'm being a little bit prejudiced here, but that was probably written by this guy who is from Chicago State University. Mr. Philip Beverly, because isn't that city one where you have lots of crime from oppressed minorities, so to say? Or am I being racist here?
Don't you love it how they kind of admit here that uh, uh, like these neighborhoods with significant minority populations have a high rate of crime, which is actually true, but like it's really odd to read it here in this kind of sentence.
it's it's super racist actually. It's not a microaggression. It's macroaggression, if you ask me.
I bet if these people would ever be given reparations, they would just say that giving money to black people is just white man's way of not dealing with the white supremacy in themselves and their attitudes.
I'm sure many people, blacks and whites included, would very happily take money in exchange for or money and then say that okay, now you have been forgiven for your historical oppression. I'm sure many people would gladly accept money as a reparation rather than have that guilty white person do some internal soul searching. I mean,
Yeah,
what
but
does that soul searching benefit? Nothing.
yeah, I'm sure they would take the money, but then they would just keep on saying that the white person is racist because he just wanted to give money because he didn't want to do the soul searching. And if he doesn't give the money, then he's a racist because he's just doing the soul searching, like this idea.
So it's like a nice Kafka trap. You're bad if you do, and if you're bad if you don't.
Well, I think that it actually is, because even if you think about this text, that not locking one's car doors while driving through neighborhoods, I bet that if like all the white people lock their doors when driving through crime infested neighborhoods, then that would be racist because people assume that because there are minorities there mostly, then that something bad would happen. They don't do that in white neighborhoods.
I mean, if I were to think that there's a realistic chance of somebody just assaulting my car when driving, I would lock my doors regardless if that's a white neighborhood, poor white neighborhood, or poor black neighborhood, or poor Asian neighborhood. But yeah, if am I being somehow racist against myself if I do it in a white neighborhood?
Well, I don't know, because I always lock my car doors. Can you continue with the apology?
Okay, so apology is the next tool in the toolbox. Another tool in the rootkit that is seemingly innocent and possibly altruistic is the apology. Well-meaning white people, when confronted with the impact of their personal racism, might offer an apology for past mistreatment. Statements such as, "I'm sorry for what your people, went through with slavery." Both distances the experience in time, removing it in the current lived reality, and at the level of relationship. Slavery was an institution that existed more than a century ago, and the challenge that triggered the apology tool likely happened at a personal or interpersonal level in the present moment. This tool is effective at disarming a person of color because apologies often diffuse any anger that may have been generated by the original encounter. Part of Western culture that prevents active engagement is the belief that apologies have substance and should be accepted if offered. Similar to shame, the apology tool places a burden on the aggrieved to withdraw their challenge or withhold further comment. A variant of the apology tool is the faux apology, one that is extended in hopes of deflecting attention without the intention of repairing damage to a relationship. This faux apology differs from the apology in its authenticity and intention. So, apology. So, if I'm apologizing for something that my ancestors may or may have not done, then I'm basically removing myself from the crosshairs, that then it's harder to accuse me anymore if I already apologize. And what I should do is being a good KKK member and just say openly racist things, so that I can more easily be targeted as a racist. Is that what they're saying here? I don't hear you. You must unmute your mic.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I don't really know. Like, yeah. So I don't know. Like this. Sorry to say the same thing again. It's kind of boring, but like this seems like you are damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't. Like, I don't know. Like, well, the one thing I wanna comment here is that both distance the experience in time removed it from the current lived reality. Is this that progressives are many times blamed for mixing the past and the present. So if you look at videos, even Google has published some racially motivated videos about, like, they've done some maps about the lynchings in different places in America, etc., and they have done a commercial video about that, etc. Then always those kind of situations when these things are discussed in videos, they really mix the past and the present, that they are implying that people nowadays are really, really racist, and then they say, so black and white pictures of lynching and somehow try to say that these are still like people's mentality and people still think like this, etc. So I don't know if that has something to do with that, but I've noticed that confusing past with the present is really, really something that these people who think like this usually happen to do themselves.
Yeah, they're playing the victim for things that never happened to them. That's certainly, I mean, I'm sure there is something in this rootkit toolkit that you could also apply to people like that who share pictures of lynchings that happened hundreds of years ago as a means to gain sympathy for themselves. But then the next tool in the toolkit is folk compassion. A rootkit tool sometimes used in conjunction with the apology tool is the folk compassion tool. When challenged personally, the white person may respond with a statement like, "I feel your pain." This also is deflective, while displaying empathy towards another is often associated with an act of connection, with the speed with which white people rush to express sympathy and understanding at the expense of acknowledging their participation in racist behavior and ideology discourages a deep relational connection in the moment. Again, the paradox of experiencing more discomfort through one's own examination of participation in pro-racist ideology, supremacy, or privilege ultimately is the bridge that brings people into closer relationship. Okay, so folk compassion, folk compassion, this is something that people often do, and this has nothing to do with racism per se. People can easily, assholes who deliberately try to spite other people or bully other people, when called out for their behavior, they might then do a faux apology, like, I'm sure if you felt bad about it, I'm sorry if you felt bad about it, and then faux compassion, like, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Then this kind of faux compassion is just a standard tool for people who don't want to take responsibility for their actions. I don't see this as an example of white supremacy, because this can be used by anyone, also by black people, mind you, or by other people of color.
Yeah, well, what I noticed that it's more of a general point, but because the ideology was mentioned again, was that what do you think? Are white people born into some kind of ideology, or are they brought up in some kind of ideology without people brought them up in the society, knowing about it, and they themselves not knowing about any ideology? Or how does this whole paper seems to imply that there is some kind of an ideology that only affects white people?
Well, at the beginning of the paper, they said that American culture is kind of teaching these things, these racist ideas and views, in subtle ways to young Americans. So it's kind of ingrained in their culture, and this is how they get this racist rootkit that can then never be untrained or gotten away with, or gotten away out of their brain, out of their system. I myself have a hard time believing that something that has been brought in by teaching cannot be taken away by teaching different stuff. But then again, I do have my disagreements with this paper. This paper hasn't yet managed to convince me of its validity, and we're almost ready with the paper anyway. So I have to say this paper needs to hurry.
Yes, the paper needs to put on a turbo stage. But I want to just say that, I think that I wonder if the one instance that is teaching this pro-racist supremacy ideology, would it be FBI, because they keep releasing these pesky crime statistics all the time?
Right, crime statistics, they're so racist, because, and then there are these statistics about wages and all that, and living, how long people live, and statistics, I mean, aren't they based on reality in the end? So what should we think? Is reality itself racist, or what do you say?
Yes, well, that's your guess is as good as mine. Let's go to the next part.
Okay, then the next tool is defensiveness. One of the most obvious rootkit tools occurs when a white person responds to a black person by saying that they never owned slaves and therefore should not have to bear any responsibility for the modern incarnations of racism or racialized behavior. This defensive posture is usually intended to end the conversation and relieve the white person of the responsibility of privileged behavior. The use of the defensiveness tool, in addition to trying to silence the person of color, also protects the ideological presence of white supremacy by reinforcing the belief system that in white Americans that slavery was the only experience that they are or should be responsible for, considering racism. Yeah, that's the defensiveness part. So there is something else then, apart from slavery, apparently. But what is this other thing? They still have not proven that there is this other white supremacy that they talk about so much in this paper, that people of color are being oppressed by. How does this white supremacy manifest? They never provided any proof of that. Do they have some statistics?
I think you are just...
The only statistics they have provided until now are crime rates. So
yeah, but I think you are...
that people of color are committing more crime. Is this the proof that they are being oppressed?
I think that you are just closing your eyes to this reality, because clearly the thing that you drive with your car doors open is the racist thing that oppresses people of color.
Ah, right. These white people who engage in masochism, that they open their doors in criminal minority neighborhoods. They are actually being supremacists, because by doing that, when a minority person breaks into the car, then that increases the crime statistics and therefore reinforces the belief that minorities are actually bad and they deserve to be at the bottom of society. So actually this seemingly anti-racist white person is actually the biggest racist of them all.
Exactly.
Okay, should I go on, or do you have something else to comment on this one?
Continue on.
Okay, so the next tool is I don't understand. Similar to the average adolescent response of I don't know, I don't understand begs the issuance of a pass around whatever perceived transgression has occurred. Within the judicial system, ignorance of the law is no excuse for misconduct. In the area of race work, a similar sentiment is necessary. The use of the I don't understand tool can also be seen in the results of a study conducted by Trepanier, who used the term silent racism to describe the seemingly harmless thoughts, images, and assumptions that shape white people's realities about differences. Trepanier found that the passivity among some of her subjects in the study took on three forms. 1. Detachment from race matters. 2. Apprehension about being perceived racist. And 3. Confusion about what is racist and what is not. People of color do not have the luxury of being ignorant of complex racial dynamics in a system founded on and dominated by white supremacist ideology. When white people use this tool, it is designed to shift responsibility away from the individual onto the person of color, who has several choices, all undesirable. First, a person of color may attempt to teach the white person in order to bring a level of understanding to the situation. Second, a person of color may change the conversation altogether to something less threatening and more universal, understood like the weather. Third, a person of color may exercise an exit strategy and disengage from the white person altogether. In these encounters, white people tend to experience greater tension the more this rootkit tool gets activated. Once again, a critical element of this behavior invites the person of color to assume the responsibility for bringing cultural and racial awareness to the surface. While for many this has been the norm for years, the challenge to advance racial awareness and dialogue is for white people to obtain their own understanding without relying on a person of color to raise this awareness. Okay, this is the last in the defensive rootkit toolkit thing. So what do we think about this? I don't know. I don't understand how to treat this tool.
Well, I think this silent racism is the best thing ever, like to describe the seemingly harmless thoughts, images, and assumptions that shape white people's realities about differences. Like, I don't know, are these like memes, or are these like example statistics, or are these like some assumptions about the reality or whatever? Like, it's really vague, but seems legit.
So if I ask you, where are you coming from? Where do you come from? And then you say that this is a racist statement. It's offensive to acknowledge the fact that you're an American by birth. Then this is if I then say I don't understand, why is this racist? Then that's somehow silent racism. If I mean, I could legitimately think that there are many people who don't understand why that statement could be racist. I think it's actually a small minority who intuitively understand what this means, that how this is a racist question. This just seems so conspiratorial, this idea that even an innocuous question like that can suddenly be a form of white supremacy or racism. Then only the trained eye can see these things, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think most people have any idea what this person means, not just adolescents. Okay, then I'll continue with the offensive rootkit behaviors. So first of all, generally about these offensive rootkit behaviors, the rootkit tools just described share a common defensive or deflective nature. 3 additional toolkit behaviors can be considered offensive in that they actively separate and protect the white person from individual responsibility or accountability around race behavior. The first one is pain game. One very familiar tool used by white people is to play the pain game. The pain game is designed to silence, diminish, or denigrate the experience of a person of color, micro-insult and micro-invalidation. This tool seeks to make equivalent experiences by using statements like, well, if you think people have it bad, what about the Holocaust? The pain game shifts attention from the impact of racist statements, behaviors, or beliefs by focusing on alternative racial, ethnic, or target group. The pain game has an implicit message of get over it because you are not the only ones. Opportunities for greater relatedness through a deeper understanding of white behavior thus are lost in this contest of pain. Well, have you experienced the Holocaust personally?
No, I really haven't.
Okay, so you can't tell me I'm racist if I ask you where you come from. This would be an example of me playing the pain game. But if I justify asking you where do you come from by asking if you lived through the Holocaust, then that makes me a racist and someone who makes excuses for my racism also. But
let's try another example, because we've so overused this one very light microaggression of where are you from. So let's just use the example if someone says that you look really good for a black girl.
Well, that sounds insulting, even if you take the racial aspect away. Like,
yeah, but
really good for...
let me continue. What if you just the other person, of course, says that, oh my God, that's racist, and then you just, well, have you experienced the Holocaust? I like this interaction.
Yes, it really is it's a real one, I have to say. But the pain game, yeah, I mean, one thing that certainly comes to mind is Oppression Olympics, when feminists talk about how women have had it so bad, and this is used to justify everything. So, but isn't what this paper itself is doing, isn't that at least partially a pain game in itself, because it talks about past slavery and this is so bad. Okay, fair enough. It also talks about this present supposed white supremacy that it fails to give any evidence of, but it also talks about past slavery and all that, and this is also a pain game, isn't it? They're saying they had it so bad my people had it so bad in the past that now I need reparations.
Yeah, but I think the difference is that, or how I interpret this pain game example is that that's still your race and your identity or whatever. But if you use that to people of color, well, I guess I just in my mind just thought that in Holocaust they only killed Jews, but yes, they did kill people of color also. So yes, that is exactly the same.
And they killed gays and they killed wrong thinkers. So not only Jews. Yeah. Or I'm sure actually in Holocaust you could limit Holocaust just to those people of Jewish origin who were killed, and all the other people who were also killed in the concentration camps, they were not necessarily part of the Holocaust itself.
Yeah, true.
But so yeah, I mean, if the other question is, of course, why should a black person living in 2017 necessarily be associated with a black person who lived 300 years earlier? Why should the white person living now be associated with the white person living 300 years ago? Couldn't
Well,
it be vice versa also?
my progressive friend actually answered me this, that, well, you don't see the same crime statistics, you don't see the same earnings, so can you really refute that it has nothing to do? Like, how long does the effects of slavery actually work? Because, like, if you think about how people actually get rich, it's like kind of like a multi generational thing, that you work really hard and you leave some company or whatever to your children, and then they kind of have it a little bit better, and then they maybe have money to buy their children to go to some tutor to teach them stuff and get to the best universities, and then they earn a lot of money, and then they leave that all money to the next generation, etc., etc. And this how you get rich families, etc. So, like, how can you say that the effects of racism have ended when you still have these differences in populations? Is an argument I've heard used in this context.
But then wouldn't you say that Asian immigrants coming to America or to other Western countries who are statistically speaking very successful here, then shouldn't those people also be definitely below whites, simply by virtue of coming to the country later on, and often coming from countries that, at least at that time when they left those countries, were much poorer than white countries?
Well, I hate to break it to you, but since this has been circulated in the Evergreen College, in that day, the day of absence when white people were not allowed to come to the college, and there were even some speeches, etc., there was a speech called the Asian problem or something like that. So they are very aware of it, and they are like thinking that Asians are the problem also, like that Asians should be grouped with whites in their ideology.
The Asian problem. So you mean it like the Asians are a problem because they show that there is no racism in white society?
No. But that the Asians are the problem because they're so privileged.
I see.
I think the speech was about that exactly.
Well, the Asian problem in itself, that sounds very much like the Jewish problem.
No, that's the Jewish question.
Oh, okay, the Jewish question. Should we then, in the future, expect there to be a final solution to the Asian problem or the Asian question?
Well, I wasn't at that speech, and I haven't been able to find that speech online, so I have no idea, and I'm not willing to speculate too much what they talked about it in detail, but it's very odd.
They probably don't want it to be publicized because there was something that shouldn't be in broad daylight, at least from their perspective.
I don't know, really, because I've seen a lot of video that even the protesters have themselves posted on internet, and then when kind of papers have picked up on it and talked about it, then they've called it racist. That, like, they have been proud to make these videos and publish these videos where they, for example, chant Black Power, etc. But then when people point out to it and question it and say it's crazy, then they play the victim card.
I see. So perhaps this Asian problem was just so much worse that they, at least at that point, they realized that they couldn't possibly publicize that. But who knows? I wasn't
Or maybe you can find it. I haven't looked that far into it, so evergreen, call it Asian problem speech, might be somewhere. But continue.
Okay, the next tool in the offensive toolkit is the attack, or the resume approach. When utilizing this tool, the white person tends to denigrate and degrade any person who has the audacity to challenge his or her statements, beliefs, or behaviors. Attacking operates similarly as in professional sports when the best defense is a good offense, since the attention shifts to the person of color who then becomes the subject of a negative experience. This attack tool may use the resume approach. In this instance, the attacker delivers to the challenger a multicultural resume identifying how his or her behaviors exclude participation in racist behaviors, i.e., I have many black friends, or we hired a Latina nanny. Again, the end result of this behavior keeps white people from having a greater connectedness with people of color. It is important to note utilizing attack is not the same as the obvious expression of verbal aggression or overtly negative statements. So the attack. So this sounds very similar to that hurt feelings approach because they use similar or some other previous approach like I have many black friends. But how is this attacking? To me, this seems like a defense rather than an attack. Or is it implied that after saying that I have black friends, this white racist bastard then continues by saying that you accused me of racism, how dare you?
Yeah, well, that is true. I mean, this seems very same than I think I have many black friends was mentioned before in those tools. So I don't know, like why was this? Well, the resume approach, like, okay, so that you can say that I've done these good things in my life that I can't be racist.
So you're basically denied of giving any counter evidence. You just have to assume that, okay, if a black person or a person of color calls you racist, then you just have to accept that you are a racist bastard and apologize. But then if you apologize in the wrong way, then that's also a form of racism.
Isn't it good to know these rules if someone sometimes tries to call you a racist and you know all the tricks?
Well, I don't know, because I don't really see how I can get through using these rules, because then they just accuse me of racism in a different way.
Well, I just myself, I will count on that if I throw them that, well, have you experienced the Holocaust? They leave me alone.
Yes, that's the go-to argument that I would use too, if somebody calls me a racist. But yeah, then the next thing is white guilt in the toolbox of offensive things to say. The final offensive tool of the racism rootkit is white guilt. It is both an individual and a collective response to oppression. When utilizing this tool, white people may appear to be overly solicitous in order to make up for the historical experience of oppression, find themselves bending over backwards to help others, and generally find themselves being unable to set reasonable boundaries within interpersonal encounters with people of color or around issues concerning people of color. A common place this occurs socially is when a person of color expresses a strong negative emotion in a group setting about dealing with white people. A person experiencing white guilt will often approach this person to provide comfort, as if to make up for the indignation expressed by the person of color and position themselves as not like that. Supremacy themes can appear well hidden, since doing the right thing for another truly masks an underlying need to make up for something, as opposed to true understanding of the real impact of color experience when dealing with the various microaggressions of daily life. In short, the actions stemming from guilt typically reflects superiority and need to help to bring people of color to their level. Well, first of all, that I have to say at this point, we have heard so much in this paper about this true understanding of white evilness or white supremacy or whatever this thing is. I have not quite yet understood what it actually is because they talk so much about that in the paper, but they never ever define it very well. What should a white person then do instead of instead of indulging in white guilt or something? Okay, there was this one thing that okay, I understand that that was racist and I apologize, but that's it. Is that the deeper understanding? What if that is just a full apology?
I don't want to spoil, but I think it comes after these tools, and I think it has to do with you installing a racist Ubuntu operating system onto yourself. But I want to go that I think that is white guilt. I think this is something that even feminists hate, and like everyone hates white guilt, like white people may appear to be overly solicitous in order to make up for the historical experience of oppression. I can't, and find themselves bending over backwards to help others. I can't, like, I have to think that this open borders thinking is exactly like this.
Yes, you may have a point there. This is actually it very much must be because often what I hear when justifying this open borders policy in Europe, they say that well, the white man has caused the war in Iraq and the white man has done this and that. So definitely, and we need to accept our global responsibility and we need to globally help people. This certainly is a part of that. Playing into white guilt is what makes people do these stupid things, like open borders to everybody.
Okay, can you take the next one?
All right. Then combined offensive defensive rootkit tools. And the first one is intellectualization. This tool provides the white person an opportunity to assert their intellectual superiority by dismissing the emotional experience of the people of color with an intellectual interpretation from the position of white privilege. Used as a defensive tool, a white person might comment on the exceptions, such as the success of a media figure or a professional athlete, as an indicator of the absence of racism, privilege, and white supremacy. If the defensive intellectualization, which is designed to deflect the attention away from the racist thought, belief, or action, fails, the white person can turn the intellectualization into an intellectual attack that could take the form of dismissing the experience of the person of color and telling the person to get over it, because logically, the person of color should not be having the experience they are having. Okay.
Well,
so that's intellectual.
Well, this is the first and last of the combined offensive and defensive rootkit tools. And I think I must admit that we have been, I think we might have been intellectualizing whole this video.
Yes, you're right. We have been. So now they got us. Now they got us. We have been bad boys, the whole bad white boys the whole time. I assume at least that you are also white. You can see my face here, but what about you? Are you also white actually?
I'm actually blue, like you can see from the picture.
Oh right. I'm so sorry for being so racist. So
you assumed that I'm something, but I'm actually blue.
So is it racist for me to ask then, are all Finnish people blue?
Well,
blue and white, perhaps?
Yeah, blue and white.
Okay. Well, that's perhaps a racist question to ask, but at least I got an affirmative answer. Now, with regards to this intellectualization, they tell that it's bad to dismiss the experience of a person of color by telling them to get over it and dismiss that you should be logical instead of so emotional. But
Let me ask you one question.
didn't they previously criticize that there shouldn't be this faux sympathy or something like that? That it's bad to offer sympathy. That it's better to let them vent, or and at the same time it's a bad thing to let them vent.
Yeah, that's true. That's a contradiction there. But I want to ask you one question: that how long has to be from slavery to be able to tell a person that get over it, and to kind of emphasize this in like 1800s during this period in Finnish history called Iso Viha. I don't know what it's exactly called in English, but Arabs slaved possibly even 200,000 Finnish women and children to Arab countries. And
do you mean Russians?
No, Arabs.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, not necessarily even one decade or even one second needs to go, depending on who the individual exactly is. If the individual himself has not been a slave, then I see a much weaker case for him demanding any reparations for anything. If you ask these guys, then I guess even thousands of years are not enough, because they want reparations no matter what, and they will have an excuse ready at any time.
I think you are in for a rude awakening, because, for example, if we think about when Finland had war, independent war, etc., I think it took several generations to studies say to get over the collectual trauma of that war. I don't know what that actually means, but like, for example, when we are now taking immigrants in, and it depends on what ethnic background, but for example, if we think about Somalis, then only like 20% of them are working, unless they are in welfare. But that doesn't actually that much change from generation to generation, because after the second and third generation, it's still only like 30% or something like that. So if it doesn't take the war trauma, if you can get over it in one generation, then that certainly hasn't been happening in Finland's experience.
Well, I will say that if you have been personally a slave, then during your lifetime there is a strong case that you should get reparations, and that will take some time. But you have to look at it on an individual case by case basis. Some people might have suffered more, and some people might have suffered less. But certainly after one century after the slavery, I would say that there's a very weak case that anybody should get any reparations.
Yeah.
What you said about Somalis, I mean, were Somalis slaves in Finland?
No, but they had the war trauma from where they are coming.
I see. So, but that war trauma doesn't seem to help any, because that war trauma doesn't seem to be diminishing if you say that their low employment rates are a result of that war trauma.
I don't know if it is, but like that's the argument here. But that people are saying, but here's the thing, that I can understand it over one generation, because think about this: if you come from Somalia to Finland as an adult, you can't write or read in any language, not your own and not even Finnish language. Then it could be kind of hard to teach the culture to your kids.
It could be.
Okay, but I continue. So The rootkit in the service of supremacy. Computers have various hidden programs that wield significant influence over the total operating system. Similarly, okay, well, these persons who say that computers have various hidden programs that have, they must have a lot of viruses on their computers. Similarly, the racism rootkit serves a valuable function for white people, namely maintaining a worldview that allows them to experience reality through Euro-American perspective, SU 2004. White people cannot help but be significantly influenced by this underlying program, operating in default manner to maintain the illusion of sameness and equality. As Sue described, to fully deny the imbalance of power allows white people to maintain their unearned privileges and advantage in society, page 763. We ultimately believe that the rootkit prevents white people from recognizing the ethnocentric basis of their beliefs, values, and assumptions, page 764. In short, the rootkit program operates hidden in the root kernel of consciousness to maintain the illusion of white supremacy and working to prevent white people from seeing the full reality. It perpetuates that Sue has depicted as an invisible veil of whiteness. One result of the racism rootkit in the development of a masked white self as a function of avoiding an association with racism, Thompson and Neville, 1999. The masked white self maintains one face to the world while hiding from the full awareness a deeper belief about white identity. In circumstances where one's behavior, thoughts, and actions became questioned, the racism rootkit activates a set of tools to prevent the deeper white self from being seen or acknowledged. The root program, as it relates to race, actively prevents the conscious awareness of what Thompson and Neville defined as white identity, which is associated in part with the notion of white superiority and non-white inferiority. Bursting the circle of racism will likely entail whites having to acknowledge that they are socialized to believe that they are endowed with racial privilege and entitlement and willingness to relent the advantages and privileges gained from racial oppression. This effort, although simply stated, is probably one of the most formidable barriers to the demise of racism because white socialization is deeply embedded within the American ethos. Page 197. It is ironic that only through piercing the rootkit program, particularly during interpersonal encounters where whites' behaviors are challenged, can there be true connection, accountability, and the potential for healing. The tool of the racism rootkit, however, works actively to prevent this. Underneath the racism rootkit, a potential for relationship in order to continue to increase racial awareness. White people have to do battle with the tool of the racism rootkit. This ultimately means establishing an alternative patch to prevent the rootkit tools from activating in such a way to prevent relationships with others. It is our belief that the racism rootkit forever remains present. Attempting to eradicate it would prove futile, just by the very notion that white people have for centuries developed their own idealized history as a consequence, forged a false belief in superiority. Thompson and Neville, 1999. What becomes a required, however, is a fearless and at times painful commitment for what Thompson and Neville define as a more realistic assessment of the white self, which is interdependent with the assessment of racial others, page 199. Essentially, the path to the rootkit establishes a white identity that is independent with others who do not think white or are not white. while a more realistic assessment of the white self ultimately leads to a greater stability. This requires continual vigilance so that the racism rootkit tools do not rise to the surface in order to prevent this new self-appraisal. What do you think about this?
Okay, well, first, this changes a lot because originally at the beginning of the paper they talked about the American society kind of teaching this racism and this white superiority from a very young age to white kids in the American society. But now they talk about this racism and this superiority complex being somehow intrinsic to whiteness, which then makes me question what can really be done about it if this rootkit cannot be removed. As they say, it can only be patched with another computer analogy, of course. But wouldn't it be easier to just kill all white people? Because this idea that whites have this that they can't get rid of it, no matter what they do, this really seems to suggest quite bad things. That either white people need to be under constant surveillance, which seems to be what they are suggesting here, basically, or one might also think that they could all be killed, and then the evilness is gone. But this is a very bleak view, in my opinion, that whites can't really, in any way, shape, or form, get rid of their racism and their original sin of being white.
Yeah, I really can't comment what kind of history do they teach in United States, but like my belief from what I've been told in history is that, for example, that Finnish people have been enslaved is not mentioned at all in our history courses. There is a strong emphasis on how Nazis are bad and not that much about how, for example, communism is bad or how much Lenin or Stalin killed. Those numbers are not really that interesting for history teachers in our schools, at least in college. No, it's not college, but like Lukio, high school. But anyway, and like this, so I like I would even say that it seems to emphasize the bad things whites have done. Of course, it's been this from Eurocentric view, so that kind of gives an excuse or reason that there is not that much about Hutut and Tutsit killing each other or something else that happens in Africa or whatever, that there is like this the bad things about colonialization are really in the center of the history that is teach here. I don't know how it's in America, but I would like say exactly the different that in my way that actually like we are teach this picked history that is almost from this ethnic studies feminist lens where only white people do bad stuff and other people are just pleasant and beautiful. And one other thing I want to mention is like I really get where you get those should white people be killed or whatever, because it really seems in this place like that the masked white self maintains one face to the world while hiding from the full awareness of deeper beliefs about white identity, so that there's something really bad and ugly and horrible about whiteness that is not even present when you look at it or something you can see right from the top, but you have to really like dig deep, and there's this horrible crazy bad thing there hiding inside every white people. Like I really get this image from this part of the paper.
Yeah, okay. Should I continue? Or should you continue then, actually?
Yes, I'll continue. Underneath the racism rootkit, a potential for relationship. In order to continue to increase racial awareness, and this is the thing. Why do you need to increase the racial awareness? Shouldn't you just view people as individuals and not see the race? I don't know. White
That's
people have
racism.
to. Yeah, I know. White people have to do battle with the tools of their racism rootkit. This ultimately means establish an alternative path to prevent the
You
rootkit
just read that
tools.
already.
Okay.
The next paragraph.
Okay, so one consequence of the commitment for white people is to experience both significant cognitive dissonance and the emotional pain of racial oppression. It is the onset of pain that activates the tools of the racism rootkit, and enlisting oneself in greater racial sensitivity essentially requires a struggle. There is a clear risk to going against the rootkit programs as it relates to white superiority. White people risk rejection, anger, isolation, and a strong sense of betrayal by other whites. It requires the ability to tolerate a surge of powerful feelings, both internally and from others. Being willing to challenge the automatic activation of the racism rootkit requires white people to invest and more likely continually reinvest in an aspect of the self that is typically generates feelings of shame, guilt, rage, and anxiety. So let's just keep white people shamed, guilted, rage, and anxiety and hope that nothing bad happens. Thompson and Neville, 1999, page 200. Establishing a patch on the racism rootkit to dampen the powerful automatic nature of root behaviors requires enlisting oneself in a conspiracy of pain. This means a white person must invest in experiencing his or her own pain in the presence of people of color and other white people. It is only then the long term belief can be produced even while encountering potentially painful short-term effects. So if we keep whites continually feeling these generated feelings of shame, guilt, rage, and anxiety, what do you think what happens if you think about, for example, Germany as an example of group guilt, that how well did that work after the First World War?
Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually. I mean, at first, that probably would go into depression, but then, when returning from that depression, they will then go to the other extreme. They will go to anger, not towards themselves, but towards others, and that will just then be prone to generate the next conflict and the next problem. So I don't think this is a very good idea to shame white people for being white and all of that. They also talk about struggling. This is a struggle, and other whites will betray you when you start thinking about these things, and they will be bad to you, and you need to be vigilant against your inner racism rootkit activating, and you need to have a conspiracy of pain where you show your bad feelings to people of color and other whites. This sounds almost like an action adventure that you need to do here, but which makes it actually sound quite appealing, I guess. But obviously, if you really think about it, this doesn't make so much sense. I mean, this racism rootkit, until now, this paper has failed to really convince me that this racism rootkit is real. It seems to me that this is just their way of justifying things rather than it actually being there existing this inherent white evilness and racism. So basically, I think they're full of shit.
Yes, and I don't know. I would just say that tread lightly. Like this could really backfire if you keep on building the guilt. Like, well, let's continue. Although the rootkit is never uninstalled or eradicated, it may be dampened to the willingness to experience the pain associated with breaking down a false sense of white superiority and being willing to adopt a significantly different worldview. Again, with accountability, EA, by working against the automatic activation of racism rootkit tools and making the ugly normal, can we begin to heal and move forward, separate and together in a struggle for an appreciation of our separateness and our common connection as human beings. Perhaps what occurs when moving through this conspiracy of pain will bring us closer to diminishing the insidious nature of racism rootkit. One of the greatest challenges and questions that remain to be answered is, why would whites willingly want to experience pain? The field of psychology, for example, has been challenged to accept the necessity to teach, express, and develop a scientific knowledge base informed by social justice, Mayes 2000. What could motivate whites in general to be willing to experience this discomfort in order to establish relationships with people of color? There are examples in the world, universal themes in fact, that are lived in a variety of cultures that may shine light on the path that is necessary. One such example is the African concept of Ubuntu, defined as a person through other persons, Sutta as cited in Lu 1997. The South African government officially recognized Ubuntu in 1997 as the principle of caring for each other's well-being and a spirit of mutual support. Each individual's humanity is ideally expressed through his or her relationship with others, and theirs in turn through a recognition of the individual's humanity. Ubuntu means that people are people through other people. It acknowledges both the rights and the responsibilities of every citizen in promoting individual and society well-being. What do you think? Do these people concentrate on the rights or the responsibilities of a citizen?
I think these people here concentrate on the rights of people of color and on the responsibilities, definitely on the responsibilities of white people. So they do concentrate on rights and responsibilities in a certain way.
That is very good answer. I was thinking that there was again this making the ugly normal.
Yeah, ugly. So what's so ugly about minorities? I don't know.
Yeah, that is really odd. And one thing is that, like, I think here is what this analogy of operating system really, I think, falls short for me, because I think, at least in video games, if you install a patch, then it fixes the problem and the problem is fixed. Like, it is not that whenever you start a video game, then it comes back to the point where there is not the patch and the bugs and problems can be seen, but that the patch actually does something and fixes the thing, and then the thing works. Or what do you think?
Yes, that is the one thing that where this analogy fails the real world, and between the real world and this computer analogy, that a patch does, at least when it does what it's supposed to do, that it does actually fix the problem for good. But here, no, here the approach is a very different one. Here the approach is that white people, purely defined by skin color, whites have this original sin or this racism rootkit that can never be removed. Whereas in computers, you can indeed remove rootkits quite easily if you have the right software, if you have the right virus removal tools, or you can just reinstall the operating. No, that might actually not work, but still you can actually get rid of rootkits. So no, this is not a perfect analogy.
Yeah, so establishing and sustaining relationships with people of color and adopting a stance towards white people to enlist them in the struggle are not easy challenges. Recognizing the long-standing mechanisms designed to prevent the adaptation of the philosophy that I exist through my interactions with others will greatly advance the work white people can do to enhance racial sensitivity. Perhaps the Zulu concept of Ubuntu could be the beginning of a path to racism rootkit. Such a proposition remains to be seen, but both white people and people of color can be served by adhering to such universal principle of caring. The end. How would you conclude this?
I conclude this as a glorified collection of bullshit. I have to admit my racism, but I was not convinced by this text. I think there are multiple problems. First and foremost, they claim that there is white supremacy and racism in American society. They don't give any proof, any scientific proof, any statistics or anything to justify that claim. And then everything else just follows from that assumption. They beg the question. They should actually prove that there is this white supremacy. They fail to prove it, but yet still they just assume things based on this thing being a fact, which it isn't. And that they make this okay. I have to say that they do make quite interesting story or narrative. And they make this nice analogy between human beings and the real world and computer programs and viruses. I have to say it's quite entertaining, but I'm sorry to say that's everything there is to it. There is no truth behind all this. I was not convinced by this paper at all.
Oh my god, boy, we have such a long work to do with you. I guess this means that we have to have another session someday.
Another struggle session.
Yes, I have good papers about gays coming up.
Okay.
But I want to just quickly read some of these sources, references, because even though this paper is obvious bullshit and kind of humorous, I like that now I know that narcolepsy is not real, but a white racist thing. Some of these papers or studies that are cited here might be actually interesting to read or quote. So there is a the video JF Gardner SL Kawakami Gay in Hodgson Gee 2002, why can't we just get along? Interpersonal biases and interracial distrust, cultural diversity and ethnic minority psychology. Then there's Gardner SNL in video JF 2005, understanding and addressing contemporary racism from adversive racism to common group identity model, Journal of Social Issues 61. Hardy KV in Laszlofi TA 1998, the dynamics of a pro-racist ideology. This must be interesting. In McColdrick, Revisioning Family Therapy, page 118 to 128. Herbert Ray, 2007, Racism's Cognitive Toll, Association of Psychological Science Observer, 20. Cowell J, 1984, White Racism, A Psychohistory, Columbia University Press, New York. Louis DJ, 1997, Ubuntu and the Challenges of Multiculturalism in Post-Apartheid South Africa. Mayes, VR, 1999, A Social Justice Agenda, American Psychologists. McIntosh P, 1988, White Privilege and Mild Privilege, a personal account of coming to see correspondences through work in the women's studies. this might be really good. In Amal Anderson, Hobe Gollings Edge, Race, Class and Gender, and Anthology, page 70 and 81. Sue DV 2004, Whiteness and the Ethnocentric Monoculturalism, Making the Invisible Visible, American Psychologist, 59. Sue DV 2005, Racism and the Conspiracy of Silence, Presidential Address of the counseling psychologist, and it continues on. Sue and DV 2006, the invisible whiteness of being, whiteness, white supremacy, white privilege, and racism. In MG, Konstantin, MG, and Davy, Sue, Addressing Racism, page 15 to 30. Sue, DV, Kabilogu, and CM Torino, Giti Bujeri, JM Holder, Ambi, Nadal, JL, Un Escaling M, 2007, Racial Microaggressions in Everyday Life, American Psychologist, 62. Thompson, C.E., Neville, H.I., 1999, Racism, Mental Health, and Mental Health Practices, the Counseling Psychologist, 27. Trapanier, P., 2006, Silent Racism, How Well-Meaning White People Perpetuate the Racial Divide. And Watson Jones, D., 2004, The Evidence of Things Seen and Not Seen, The Legacy of Race and Racism, Family Process, 43. And that concludes this document. So do you have any final words? This was really interesting and nice to go through.
Well, the final question then that needs to be answered, if I am wrong about racial issues, or this paper and all the references are wrong about racial issues, I would have to say that probably they are wrong, but I don't know. This is certainly a question to be tackled in the future. That's all I have to say about this.
Yes, and I thank you everyone for listening, and stay tuned and stay awoke.